This is Azento from Esports Heaven, and I have here with me Danan from Golden Guardians, the general manager. I don't think a lot of people see you, so I just want to first talk about your deal with River. How did that happen?
Yeah, River's an interesting case for us. I think probably one of the coolest things about us is our kind of our willingness to walk into stuff towards the trade deadline. I think a lot of teams kind of get stuck in the sunk cost fallacy of what's happening with their team, obviously, especially when you get to this part of the year when it comes to summer split. You've put a lot of time and energy into the players that you've had for the year. I think we've been seeing it change over time, but I think we're one of those teams that's just willing to have those conversations, and that's just a lot of it. It's really important to me that I sit down and talk with all of the GMs on the other teams. Anytime we're at one of these deadline type windows, there's one for spring, there's kind of one for mid-season, and then there's another one into summer before November. And that's all it was. It was just, it's a pretty surface layer conversation a lot of times with a lot of teams. Hey, are you making any changes? What are you guys thinking? How are you feeling? You just get an idea of where teams are going strategically. I mean, we're in a league. We're all partnered together. So people can be pretty cordial and pretty transparent for the most part about how they're feeling without it being too much of a problem. And just, through that conversation, it popped up an opportunity for us to acquire River, and we jumped on it.
So talk to me about how much different a mid-season transfer is versus the beginning of the year. There must be a lot of different things.
Yeah, it's definitely more chaotic, mostly in that, for the most part, the players that you're talking about must be in market. It's really hard, obviously, to acquire an out-of-market import at the last second, or even an out-of-market domestic player, someone who's not in LA, someone who's somewhere else, either in the US. Even Canadians count as imports procedurally because you have to get the visa.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, in season it's it's at least a narrower field of players typically, but it's definitely more chaotic. Yeah. There's a lot more logistics to manage in the immediate. In the off season, you have a couple weeks to say, hey, we figured out our deal, and we're sorting out what housing is going to look like, and we're discussing all of the little logistics of how we're going to transition someone into basically in market. That kind of goes out the window. Yeah, you hit summer, and mostly inside. Anytime halfway or later in summer, it's a bit of a chaos and a stretch and a play, and you're definitely moving things around and trying to adjust as appropriate to transition between housing that you're already in, someone's already here, you have less than 8 hours to do something, you have less than 24 hours to do another thing, you have to do all 9 of them within a 7-hour window. It's a little bit more chaotic, but the upside ends up being that typically when you make moves like this, it's just it's probably a more functional opportunity for your organization. A lot of times in the off season, everyone's done way more prep and way more build up for their decision making, sure. And because of that, everyone's a little more rigid. In season, this is when you're going to find flexible opportunities where maybe what was going on with River at Dig wasn't working out, and there's an opportunity for us to obviously excel and jump on top of being able to make something work. And when those two things line up in season, it's a bit of a lower lift from a trade perspective. Okay. Off season, there's 1,000 more assets moving. It's a lot more complicated. You try to make a move and then 8 moves trigger. In season, it can really be low key, 1-to-1, and you just you do a thing.
So talk to me about the Worlds happening in North America. This is a really big thing. I'm pretty sure a lot of orgs, NA orgs, are very excited this year about it.
None more than us.
So I guess tell me about the importance from an organization perspective, maybe a sponsorship perspective, because you've got to talk to those guys. Talk to me about how important Worlds is for you this year.
Worlds this year, I think, is massive. It's not just us as an organization. I would say for our region, it's been, was it 6 years? Some insane amount since we've had a North American Worlds experience, and that's just, it's so weird. It almost feels foreign, especially when it used to be that Worlds was hosted in North America for a couple of years straight initially, just because obviously where Riot's located. Yeah, for us organizationally, it's a big deal. Obviously, everyone knows that we own the venue for finals. Golden State has pushed out, and we did a big announcement, did a big public run of Chase Center being where we're going to wrap everything up. So that's really cool. But even just looking at where we're traveling when it came to like initially Toronto, but that fell away, up through I think it's like New York, finally getting an opportunity to basically go multinational for a U.S. Worlds. They obviously haven't done that before. That's just huge. That's awesome. That'd be a cool experience if we work our issues out the split and we find ourselves in a Worlds position. I'd be more than happy to go to Mexico City. We've got great relationships with the LLA teams down there, the franchised Latin American teams. So I'm confident it'd be a good boot camp. Like that's all like a really cool, crazy opportunity that only comes, once every 4 years if you're lucky. Apparently 6 right now.
Yeah. So speaking from maybe the sponsorship side, how does it work as a team? Because in my head, I'm thinking if I'm a North American organization and Worlds is happening in North America, I can get more activations. I can, do all that, do better sponsorship deals. Even if my team doesn't make it to Worlds, I could still do activations at some of those venues.
Yeah.
So how is that important, I guess, from a monetary aspect? Are we talking significantly more amounts of money or?
I would say so. I think the struggle ends up being, like I said, has been so long since we've had one, and the landscape of esports has changed so significantly in 6 years that it's hard to draw like a one-to-one, like what those numbers were, what they are now. Like everything's kind of exploded out of perspective. What I will say is like it's a little funny. So Worlds is obviously a global product. It's not they don't build Worlds explicitly for the LCS teams here, us in North America. We obviously get a bit of a larger benefit to the experience. It's definitely easier and more organic to wrap our sponsors into any international event that takes place on Canadian, U.S., or Mexican soil, just like hands down. But when it comes to like what does that mean for sponsors on our end? We don't know yet. We actually we haven't, like, literally last time Worlds was in North America, Golden State didn't have an esports team.
True.
So this is I don't want to say it's foreign territory, but it's new. It's like a kind of pioneering a frontier. I will say it's really cool. I definitely have heard a lot of rumblings around the Worlds event. And trying to wrap in definitely presence of LCS teams more robustly. I think they want to do this in general when they travel to different regions. They want to wrap the local regional league in, even the teams that didn't necessarily qualify. And I think we're seeing this actually have a trickle-down effect. I think LCS Finals is having the same conversation, right? Where we want to start bringing out every LCS team, get them a little bit more energized about all of these larger scope, 20, 30, 50,000 person events to try to get more hands in and around and on the players and the talent and people in person, kind of like what LCS Tailgate used to be, but obviously that's much smaller scale.
Yeah. So I want to jump over to Europe because I'm sure you've heard the news that Misfits have sold their slot over in the LEC.
Yeah.
And I kind of make the comparison of Misfits and Golden Guardians because I see both of these teams as development teams, people that do try and do smart contracts and play the field as best as they can in terms of like a kind of a legal perspective, I guess you could say in some sense. What's your opinion on the situation going over in the LEC in terms of the Misfits leaving?
I think with how they operate their roster, I think I see your parallels. Makes total sense. Especially, I have a lot of respect for Deficio and the whole crew over there. I think the thing that's interesting is like the actual outcome of their sale is kind of irrelevant to how they've been building their team, right? I don't think it's ever been known, or there's definitely not a track record of like teams are like smart and they're very concise and they obviously like build young and like that kind of stuff, and they obviously, like you were saying, kind of playing the legal angle of like running a team efficiently. There's definitely not a track record of those teams selling or anything. Maybe this is the start, but realistically what I see there is like they have a similar style of management, but they have a wholly different ownership. Obviously we're wholly owned and operated exclusively by the NBA organization. Like that's where we're at. Some other teams have some adjacency, but no one is really owned the way we are. Obviously, most other teams have like a series of investment groups or an individual investment group that kind of steers that ship. And I'm assuming that's like really what drove the sale in Europe. And I just think we're obviously notably different in structure.
Yeah. So finally, I want to touch on I don't know if you've heard the news of the LCK New Contract rules.
Yeah. Haven't read them all yet, but I've heard bits.
Okay, so I want to get your opinion on parts of the different clauses. Which there's a development clause, which I believe essentially says that you get first dibs on your academy players, and that you could pause it to new contract, and it's a 2-year minimum contract. Which, to be fair, I think most new contracts are 2 years anyways if you're
Yep.
in a rookie position, so that's not really a big deal. But there is a clause which says that there is a transfer fee if a player is still in contract, and then there's a double transfer fee if that player is traded outside of the league.
Okay.
What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's interesting. My guess, and so this is where it's a little bit unique, unless you know every single region and their rules like down to the bottom. Hearing like rookie contracts that go what sounds like a 1+2 effectively isn't that surprising. I actually think historically what we've seen across most of the region has been kind of more team-sided. Like you see a lot of like just straight up 3-year contracts. It's rare to see a lot of options in general. In the context of like a double buyout for out of region, that's interesting. I think a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here is just really foreign to how, at least lately, I've been thinking about like how we do our rules here and what we do. But a lot of that's just because of the nature of the relationship. America has very strong antitrust laws. So a lot of the stuff that you sometimes hear out of different regions just isn't even allowed or functional. So we don't even like think about it. We don't have calls. We don't even have conversations about some of these things because they're just never allowed. It's not even a consideration. It's really interesting to see. I'm curious to see what the outcome is. Like maybe that trickles down into, saving us some time and energy if and when the PA here ever, actually officializes out in a big way. If we ever crawl into a CBA territory. Obviously, the stuff that we're seeing in these other regions will be an interesting guidebook. But from like a practical perspective, it makes total sense. Like if you're a region like Korea that's been losing a lot of its young, in their eyes, domestic talent effectively, doing what you can to curb that bleed makes sense. And I think, again, I don't know their rules at the bottom to understand, but hearing that they're trying to build some amount of like, to me, it sounds, I think people are worried that it's like blocking mobility, but I guess I don't know the average like young contract there right now. To me, it sounds like they're promoting mobility because you don't have to take this option in, which means the player can go elsewhere. The thing we end up having in North America that's kind of the opposite of this is young players on 3-year contracts out the gate, and then they just don't have mobility in that space. We've seen for a long time top academy players just kind of stay top academy players for a really long time. And I'm curious to see how this ends up impacting how those two systems interact.
So I also want to get your opinion on, there's a part of the clause that talks about a pre-contract to where essentially you can designate one player on your starting roster to say that this player we can have negotiations before any other team can, because they're still on our roster, to renegotiate for another, a renewal of their contract before anyone else. What's your opinion on that? Because from what I hear, the off season is very chaotic because there are maybe like 5 key pieces, and unless those pieces move, no one can really do anything in the entire scene. So maybe this kind of prevents that. What's your take on it?
Well, that's another foreign thing for us. I think the NBA has this where like teams, like even the team that you're signed to, like you're not supposed to be negotiating or talking. We don't really have blockades like that for the LCS. So any player I have under contract, I can talk to at any point of the year and in all regards sign extensions. Now, obviously there's a limit on how long I can sign them out. If they're already at the 3 or 4 year contract length limit, I can't go beyond that. But anytime inside that 3 or 4 year contract, absolutely, I can just wake up one day and I'm bored and say, hey, let's renegotiate this and let's go longer and let's do more, and let's go bigger, let's go smaller. Like any direction we can kind of go. So it's interesting to hear that they even have carved out windows where you're not supposed to be talking about your contract with players that you already have. I think something that's interesting, I know North America's been talking about it for a long time, is like finding a better way to interact with our free agent market. We end up in a weird space, kind of like what you were saying, where there's like, there's 5 really big major pieces that people don't know what are happening with. We actually have a really airtight anti-poaching system. Everyone knows it. There's been punishments levied in the past.
Oh yeah.
Because of that, there's like a really, really clear line where decisions are made, and that's like obviously at the free agency deadline. Because of that, you see all of these like top players. They're never granted rights to like even speak to teams, even knowing that they're not going to be on the team. Even if the team has said, hey, like we know for a fact we're going to cut you, or we know for a fact we're going to let your contract expire. It's not uncommon for organizations to say, hey, it doesn't matter. You still can't talk to anyone. There can't even be an inkling of conversation until your contract expires, until we actively terminate. And that ends up creating exactly what you're talking about, that bubble, that tension in the market. Going into mid-November. We've obviously been talking for a long time about potential solutions for it. Maybe we'll work towards one soon. But I'd be curious to see if anything like this kind of like, helps guide us.
Yeah. So finally, I guess I just want to get some closing thoughts on Golden Guardians' future and plans, maybe future roster development and such, as we're heading from summer, and of course we're going to get into the postseason. Hopefully you guys make Worlds as well.
That'd be nice. Yeah, no, the future is hard to look at right now, mostly because anytime you ask about the future, and it's in the last like 4 weeks of summer, it's just really hard to size out. Like obviously that's my job, and I've kind of been actively doing that. But it almost feels like disingenuous to answer and say like, yeah, like this is this big scope plan, and this big scope plan, and here's what's coming up, and maybe we're gonna make this pivot in November. And when realistically, I'm gonna be completely honest, all I've got in my head the entire time we've been having this conversation is like, okay, we've got Proving Grounds on Tuesday, and we've got more matches, we've got more LCS matches next week, and playoffs is like 2 weeks away, and it's just everything's in the immediate. I will say that's kind of the luxury of sports, is that you have in season, out of season. I am afforded space to not have to stress about the big scope stuff until we get to big scope window. So for now, I'm going to kick it and say I'll worry about really digging deep on that until after playoffs.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Of course.
This has been Azento from Esports Heaven and Danan from Golden Guardians. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.